was interesting. You call it the religion of no religion. I wonder if that makes a change.
Instead of that's not.
Yeah, I'm curious as to. I think we're on.
All right. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oops. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you're a little in and out.
My internet connection is unstable. Hey, Brett, can you do
Sure.
the intro, I guess? Sorry.
Sure. So welcome. We're the Bevry community, and here we're continuing our series on John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And we've got John Buck, whose internet's a little unstable today. And we got Nick Braden, Craig Reed, who's going to be joining us shortly once the football game's over, and Tyler. Hey, everybody. Everyone's good.
Yeah, I think you're the only one carrying the weight of video today.
My beautiful faces will just carry for everyone. They can just stare at me.
And I may be able to turn my camera on once my child is fully asleep. So
yeah. Nice. I'm trusting my children to put themselves down tonight, because this is around when I put them down. So we'll see if they take advantage of my streaming or if they actually go to bed at a reasonable hour on a school night. All right, so we've got today. John Vervaeke's finally unveiled a little more detail on the religion that's not a religion. And so we were worried a bit, or we had a bit of discussion last week, and I guess I was a little premature in interpreting what he said last week as saying that when he was talking about a post-narrative type of system, I thought he was hinting at getting rid of myths and getting rid of narrative, but it seems like that was a bit unfounded. But he's got an interesting take on it that he spends some time on in this episode. So in this episode, he talks about well, first of all, he and this is important because he makes it very clear he's very nervous about being taken to be some sort of leader. He doesn't want the mantle of leader. He doesn't want to start a movement, and he made that again crystal clear that everything that he's presenting in this episode, he's saying is tentative. What he's trying to do, he says, is help. He's trying to give a language, a grammar to talk about these things. He's trying to envision what would make up the religion that's no religion, but he's not pretending to have figured it out. He's sort of forming the skeleton, the criteria for what he thinks would make a good religion that's not a religion, without actually going ahead and crafting, at least not at this stage. I don't know if he goes on to do it, but I don't think so based on the interview I listened to him with sorry, what's the name of
Jordan Hall.
With Jordan Hall from 2 days ago, and he seemed to say as well that he hasn't actually figured it all out. It sounds like what he's doing is setting out what he thinks will be the science behind it, setting out the reasons for it, and setting out the criteria for it. And then what he's hoping is that other people, other groups will take up the mantle and will come to it, sort of in a crowdsourced type of way. So he really envisions this as a very just democratic, open, evolving type of thing. The theme seems to be anti-dogma. Sorry, Nick, were you trying to?
Yeah, no, I was just saying kind of goes along with the tide that seems to be flowing through lots of areas of culture right now of decentralized systems. At least that was distinctly the feeling I got between him and Jordan. Was they're aiming for this type of little perhaps pocket nodes that all share an underlying framework, which I might be going too far ahead here, but it did remind me of very early Christianity, before there was a formalized church where practitioners kind of met up in secret in each other's houses and those types of things. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Well, that's something I think we should talk about a little later on. Can a movement? I mean, for all the good intentions, for starting off in this nice open source democratic type of way, is it inevitable for for a movement. He seems very aware that there's a tendency for movements to become dogmatic, and he seems to be really trying to structure these in a way where anti-dogma is built right into the structure of the scaffolding of this religion that's not a religion. And I think he's sort of crossing his fingers and hoping it won't become something like that. But he notes that, I mean, there are different groups who have started to play around with these things of forming different communities. He notes there's books. He notes James Carse, the religious case against belief, Robert Unger, The Future of Religion, Alan de Bodden, Religion for Atheists. So he even Dawkins, who's sort of talking about awe and a poetic view of nature and the scientific worldview. So he's trying to assemble together in one place. I mean, one long place over 50 lectures, and then he teased a second series. So for anyone who was worried that it'd be 50 episodes and then he was done, it looks like he's going on and really getting into I think wisdom in other areas in a new series, which was exciting. So here's what he proposes is a first, okay, so he's warning against utopic visions. So he doesn't want, he's not trying, the aim should not be utopia, because he thinks when you aim at utopia, it can lead to tremendous amounts of destruction, and as he likes to say, drenches the world in blood. He's proposing that we need to do something like what religion used to do, which he says is a comprehensive set of psychotechnologies. So these psychotechnologies are sort of mental tools like reading, like meditation. Prayer would be a psychotechnology. So a comprehensive set of psychotechnologies within a community of practices that allows for a comprehensive transformation of consciousness, cognition, character, and culture. And he's got some great alliteration in this episode. He you can just picture him in his office coming up with consciousness, cognition, character, culture. Yeah, that one's good. He's got a few A ones in there too. I noted they will come. I thought it was clever. And so what he talks about is this religion that's not a religion has to address what he calls the meta crisis. So it's like this crisis of all crises. Now, in an accelerating fashion. Now, I'm not quite sure he's made the case that we're in some meta crisis. I mean, he's talked a lot about the meaning crisis, but I'm not sure he spent enough time really. Like it sounds like he's saying we're doomed without this, which I think is a little maybe.
All good cults need a apocalyptic foundation.
That's right. Well, but it's funny. Like he just sort of came into this meta crisis thing, but he's only really talked about one major crisis, right? The meaning crisis. But so I'm not quite sure what he's talking about in terms of the meta crises of all these crises we're facing. But
he's hinted at perhaps, right? He doesn't really get into it because I think it crosses boundaries with politics, which is something he seems to strongly avoid. But right, there's little one-liners where you can get a hint where he's climate change and the nuclear issue and right, the things that are kind of present on everybody's mind in our current age.
Yeah. And I guess the increasing of insight will help us solve climate change, perhaps. And
yeah, right. It's a little too easy to slip into those utopic visions, right?
Right. Oh, and so what he says is that this religion that's not a religion, the psychotechnology should acknowledge the centrality of religio, which was the set of mechanisms in sort of the brain body that center around sort of our spiritual meaning machine or relevance realization machine making. And here's the second great alliteration. So he says there's an important role for indispensable mythos in the activation, accentuation, acceleration, and appreciation of religio. So he worked very hard on the alliteration. But that's good. Like so he's bringing mythos back in. I was worried last episode, and we talked a lot about it, and I think John was brought it up that maybe we were a little premature in jumping. I think maybe he phrased it a little off, but he's bringing back narrative. So that's what he starts talking about. He starts talking about sort of credo, and that credo. So credo is, I believe. So a credo is the set of propositions that state the essence of what a religion is, in terms of the truth content that is to be believed. And what he warns against is credo dominance. So he warns against closed mythos. What he wants is an open-ended mythos, a mythos. So he says that one is analogous to the transgressive mythology of the Gnostics. So one that can evolve over time, and he gets into a little bit later how he goes about that. But what he warns against is just what he thinks we've done with a lot of the religions of the past is we really focused on the propositional aspect of that. So he says the propositional knowing has come into the ascendant, and it's made it's a having mode of propositions where we have propositions that we assert, a willful assertion, and that's become dominant. And this is what he doesn't use the word dogma, but it's clear this is dogma. This is what becomes
dogma flows from a over reliance on propositional knowing. In any right, we can extend that, right? Dogma is not bound into specifically religious systems, but it's any time that we, in some sense, sacrifice the other three P's of knowing to the propositional. Yeah. We enter into a dogmatic form of relating to each other and dealing with each other, perhaps, and the world.
Right, and he warns that it's not derived by reason, but asserted. So he's implying that we stop thinking about it, we stop figuring out how we came up with these propositions, but we just say this is the way it is, and that is what he wants to get away from. So he's not saying we shouldn't have credo. He recognizes that there's a function for credo.
The hierarchy's upside down, I think, is one way to view it, where it's, and we actually touched on this, I think, in one of our previous discussions. But what, I was trying to make the case for metaphysics, and I was saying that I agree with de-emphasizing certain aspects of metaphysics. So if we think of metaphysics only in terms of propositional statements about things that are unknowable about reality, then that is a bad way to think about metaphysics, right? That's not what it exists for. Instead, it's supposed to be this thing that comes up from those lower, P's of knowing. And the propositional exists so that we can communicate with each other about real lived and participatory and perspectival knowing that we've come across through life itself. And when we try and replace experiencing life itself and having these, realization moments, however we might codify them, that's when we start getting ourselves into pretty deep trouble.
As you're talking, I was just, what you said, I think just made me think we can take a participatory, would working through a proposition, working through the why of a proposition be a participatory approach to the proposition? So we can say we have a participatory note, by working through the arguments for a proposition, we're participating in that proposition, not just proposing it.
I think it absolutely can be, right? Again, it's not like a hard hierarchy. That he even highlights this at one point with the up and down arrows simultaneously, right? Propositional can lead down, right, into the other forms of knowing, but it in some way needs to, you almost have to start with the context that the goal of the propositional is, one, to communicate that upwards or that bottom up movement. And on the other hand, the other point of it is to enable us to re-enter into those other...
But I thought you were saying re-enter into the proposition, because
re-enter into participatory. Again, both directions at once, right?
Right, because questioning the proposition is almost re-entering the proposition, right? It's saying, okay, we have this proposition, which I kind of agree with, but I should still question it. I should still be looking, okay, I've learned a bunch of new things since I learned this proposition.
Yes.
How can I integrate that into it? So to go through it. So if I'm thinking, oh my God, I have this proposition, this new stuff conflicts with that. So the new stuff has to go. That's just a dogmatic, non-participatory approach to the proposition. But if
absolutely.
So and that's sort of what skepticism is. I mean, at least the skepticism that I go, which is, a process of always being willing to re-examine your propositions to see if they still have, if they're still warranted at any time. And so yeah, that's interesting. I like that. So yeah, so he talks about so he goes back into like that the mythos can still be indispensable, but it should be context. But it's context sensitive. It still should be dynamic, to avoid falling into this credo dominance. So he says there should be a dynamic coupling of religio, a set of symbols and stories and celebrations and shows associated with the mythos, but that's aimed at getting, he says, the sacredness out of religio. So I mean, religio is a dynamic, like he spent a lot of time talking about religio as this dynamic process, this relevance realization process. And if the mythos is geared, if the creed is geared towards religio, it can't be dogmatic, because religio should not be dogmatic, at least in
yeah, there's a few things going on here. One is my immediate reaction when he kind of formulated that, and in combination with some of what he was speaking about with Jordan, I'm starting to get the sense that perhaps there's too much chaos within the formulation, right? So when you have a decentralized network of people building up around a set of practices, and yet they need a narrative form, you already have a lot of chaos to deal with right there. A lot of, right, how are these people going to create a mythos that actually functions between each other and enables communication at sufficiently deep levels, while having it fully decentralized at the same time, right? You almost start to get this image of Campbell's, just every individual makes up their own gods and then worships their own gods.
But let me ask you, can you imagine, and we'll come to a sort of Wikipedia analogy, which I find really interesting, but say you took Christianity and like a lot, okay, so how we update it, and he alluded to this, how we update Christianity and Judaism and Islam is to reinterpret what's there and even ignore certain things that are there. The parts that we don't, we don't think are great anymore, we sort of push to the side. But what if we had the freedom to create a new Christ story or a new Moses story, designed to pick up what we've learned since that time, and that it wasn't a taboo, it wasn't sacrilege, it wasn't against the creed. It was sort of part of it where we say, hey, we've learned since then and we can update these stories. I mean,
I think it would fail, absolutely,
but
as a work of fiction. So I think that if anybody is going to update the stories, it literally has to be by a person living out a novel philosophy and people witnessing that person's life as a narrative form.
Well, yeah, like I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, okay, we don't talk about this a lot on this podcast, but like a lot of what I'm doing on the internet is figuring out ways to have better conversations. And the way I've started thinking about it is I've noticed patterns over like 15, almost 20 years, I guess, of doing this. I've noticed patterns that I've seen over and over and over again, and they've sort of settled into my mind in terms of ways of how sort of discussions go wrong, this us versus them. And so I've noticed these patterns, and like if I was to craft a story around those patterns, it would sort of be like a myth. It would sort of be taking in the patterns of society and crafting a story designed to
but it would recreate
patterns.
the same problem that people currently have with Christianity, which is that they think that the story is a fiction and thus can't actually believe it enough for it to perform a transformative function in their life.
Are you sure about that? Like for example, I mean, even Jordan Peterson, I was listening to I've been re-listening to his biblical lectures, and he, in one of them, I think, or maybe it was around that time at least, he read this story about dragons aren't real. It was where this dragon kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and sort of took over
you
the
can
house.
find wisdom in them. Absolutely. I'm not arguing that like there's no wisdom to be gleaned from fiction. That's obviously there's a great source of wealth within fiction. But when we are talking about a mythos and what it's required to do as separate from what we can glean from fictional narratives, I think what makes it so very powerful is precisely the idea. So in the same way that it's one thing to read a list of rules, or even say read a Socratic dialogue, and get an idea of what a good conversation is.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing, and we can learn a lot from it. But it's an entirely different thing to witness in real time or to participate in a conversation with somebody who is exceptionally skilled at it, that is modeling it through the way they're existing in the moment. And that latter has a much more powerful effect, particularly on less conscious aspects of ourselves, I think, than.
But wait, hold on. But what? But well, for example, I mean, when you say witness somebody, do you mean like witnessing Christ? Like even taking Christ, the things said in the Bible about Christ, for pure face value, say it's pure history for the sake of the argument. People today aren't witnessing that. They're still reading about it and experiencing about it. Taste. Sorry?
They're reading about it.
Right,
Sure.
they're reading about it. And they're still having a pretty massive effect from reading about it. So
Certainly.
without witnessing it.
I would. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
Hi, sorry. I thought he meant that the dogmas are necessary for it to be a religion. Like your idea is cool and it would probably work, but I think you're asking if it could be a religion, right?
Well, no, we're actually talking about his religion. So this episode's on his religion that's not a religion. So he's talking about the criteria. So just to reiterate.
Right. No, I've been listening the whole time. I was just watching.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. So let's say what you just suggested. Like, let's say we recreate Christianity with, removed these parts that we don't like, and we rebuilt it. We added in some things from Buddhism. We added some things here and there. And then we restructured it and rebuilt it in a different way so that that potentially actually could work. But it would have to be, a Christian might even be into it, but it'd have to be a spirit-led. The Christian would have to think it'd be spirit-led. Like it's a purer form of Christianity, not a weaker, not a wussy form of Christianity. Like we're just trying to appeal to this group or that group. But that potentially could work. I don't see any reason why that couldn't work.
It's like, because I've been thinking a lot of myths, like what we say about myths and using myths in the respectful way rather than not just, they're myths or fiction, but myths are sort of deep, profound stories that recognize patterns in society. But we have to admit patterns sometimes change, and we sometimes have different perspectives on these patterns, and we should we should be open to new patterns and recognizing patterns. Like the Bible, as great as the patterns it has, it didn't it's a limited book, right? It doesn't cover everything, right? And things have changed a lot since those times. So, to some extent, I don't think we should be resistant to new tales that recognize.
Changed?
Sorry, what's changed?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could take the simple stuff, like the obvious stuff, like for example, our views on slavery are very different than they were back then. Our views on
is that
a whole lot
true,
of
Pod?
I believe it is. What are you thinking about?
How do you think Apple feels about their various laborers and or dopamine engines?
Well, I don't think it's slavery in the same. I get the point. I mean, we have addictions and we have wage slavery, I guess, but it's not. I don't think it's the same as slavery in the time of the. I mean, it was a brutal society back then, right? You know, especially in the Old Testament and still in the New Testament, it was a tough time to live for a lot of people. We at least in the West, we live in it. Like there are different patterns that emerge probably out of comfort, right? That wouldn't have been there out of technology. Think of all the patterns that will have emerged now since the dawn of the internet, even, right? And like
I
these
guess
are
perhaps the question is, are they variations on a theme, or are they truly and legitimately novel patterns that need something that cannot in some way be reinterpreted back into a familiar story?
That was a much better way of phrasing it.
I get that, but you know, if we're always, but why? I guess the question is, why should we feel that we have to reinterpret old stories? Like, why should we feel that we shouldn't recognize patterns in different ways? Why should we feel that the pattern recognition, and whether you say, like Craig says, whether you attribute your pattern recognition, like there's nothing inconsistent with recognizing a pattern and feeling that it's consistent with God letting you see that pattern, right? Like, why should we feel that we should no longer put these patterns into
Well, but that's also
words?
not a representation of what religion is nor does. So generally, right, there's the entry point, and maybe with certain like kind of hardcore uh, uh, denominations of Christianity, you're supposed to only read the Bible and don't touch literally anything else. But that's not what the religion is. The religion is an enormous sequence of human beings realizing truths within it, applying it to their life, or right, and then bringing that novel experience back into the religion. So you have this cyclical motion that, and you can rely on it, right? Like I can read the Bible. That's great. Now we have a common source, but now I can also go back and read someone that lived, 20 years ago and go, how did he deal with the world as it was changing in the context of this other story? Right. So there's huge, right. I don't think it's fair to paint religion as purely being, here's your one story and that's it. It's rather, it's a huge river of stories that are all kind of right, flowing in a direction where we can identify it as a river. But that's not to say it's a single thread of that river.
And also theoretically, what you're talking about, pleasure of doubt, could just be like a really, really good pastor or religious leader does what you're saying anyways, sifts through, takes the whole book and takes the teachings of the past and sifts through and updates it so that it's relevant. I'm not saying that this actually occurs, but in theory it could, where it becomes almost a new thing, where they just kind of casually ignore. Like I don't own slaves, and I don't tell people that the Bible teaches you to own slaves, and I don't know anybody. The theory that
right, but you do have to sort of ignore certain stuff. I mean, there is a pretty.
I've got two of them. They're 4 and 6.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh God. I thought you're the slave in that equation.
Yeah, my kids like to say, "We're not your slaves for everything I ask for them to do." Right?
Craig, I think you're right.
And right, there's
hold on, just Tyler, you were saying something? Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Tyler, did you want to finish?
No. I was just realizing that the depths to which Craig was right.
Oh, that you're the slave.
He's the slave.
You want to think about you want to think about that for a bit, then we'll come back to you.
He who would be the master should be the servant.
And there you
go. There you go.
A repeating pattern.
Oh yeah. Sorry. So go ahead. Yeah, Nick, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, that was actually a more perfect example of what I was going to try and elucidate, right? Like even these areas of the story where we want to ignore it and it offends our current sensibilities, even those have ways of interpreting them and making them living again that still have applicable forms.
Okay. Well, let me ask this hypothetically. What if, like, can we recognize that it's at least possible that there are certain patterns that would be useful to recognize that really aren't contained in this or that religion? And we shouldn't talk just about Christianity, because there's other religions out there too. Wouldn't, like, can
I would say yes, and then it's our job as people that belong to the religion to bring it into the religion and update the religion with it.
Well, I mean, that's
and
sort
other
of
sheep
what
I
he's
had,
saying.
which are not of this fold.
Yeah, like if there's truth in another source or some, I think this is what you're saying, but I'm not sure I'm clearly getting it. There's truth in another source, or you lived your life and you found truth from other areas. In, let's say, put it in the context of Christianity, you're a pastor. Your job is to now update Christianity, present it in a way that's reasonable and makes sense to the modern audience, because you live in modern times. You know, I mean, it's kind of an organic process.
Well, then would you agree with Vervaeke that these creeds should not be closed but should be open?
I don't think here's the deal with Vervaeke, and this is probably the only place I disagree with him. The reason why he thinks the creed should be open is that he doesn't think that the creed is true. Now, one of the keys of apologetics, as people are trying to practice it, and I'm not saying that we've got it yet, is to try and prove logically that one aspect of the actual creed is true and corresponds to reality. He doesn't think it does. That's why he says it should be open to interpretation. It should be open to interpretation. But in that interpretation, hopefully you find the true creed. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? No? All right.
Yeah, no, I know. I understand that, but yeah, I guess.
I think I would take.
Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, I think I would take a slightly different point, which is like, right, the creeds. Perhaps it's been most useful or perhaps most accurate from my own point of view to view the creeds as truths that are to be realized rather than statements that you make without any as a group defining statement, right? It's more like, here's, right, again, I'll use the river analogy. These are the things that tell you which direction this river's flowing in. So if you're going against them, there's probably something you have not seen that all the other people moving in this river have in some way found a deep truth about reality from. But that's pointing you towards the experiential, right? Towards the participatory, not towards the dogmatic, I know because I just decided to say so.
He just touched on something that I tried to bring up in some of my videos. There's a really big difference between like a faith claim. I'm sort of saying the same thing. It doesn't sound like him. A faith claim and a truth claim. The truth claims of the Bible, people can agree are true. And I'm using that, like a truth claim of the Bible would be like, it's better to be a humble person and have a servant's heart. That's how you, like, the truth claims of the Bible can actually be propositionally true. They're not normally what people think of as the dogmas. They're different. They're like behaviors that you should adopt to be more Christ-like, be good to people, those type of things. Those things correspond to teachings in other religions.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think, like the way he seems to say too that like these different stories can, like the different myths, these different mythos can have similar effects, even though their mythos is very different. And that we should like how do you view
these two are, yeah. These two are Christians, right? There are some things, John isn't here. These two are actually Christian. There are some things that they believe that they practice in correspondence with their Christian faith that you would go, okay, that's true. And that would be propositional knowledge. It isn't Jesus rose from the dead. That's not the only thing going on in the Christian faith, or
Right.
the earth is 6,000 years old, or whatever dogma. The dogmas aren't necessarily the only truths that Christianity is trying to impart. They're, matter of fact, they're usually the least important if you're talking about changing the way someone behaves. You know, what you believe about Christianity isn't all that relevant in terms of.
But let me ask you, what would you do hypothetically? And maybe you think just this wouldn't happen, but what would you do if you came across a pattern that maybe because of that's just made itself manifest in modern society, that there isn't really a non-torturous way. By torturous, I mean by like really, there isn't really an easy a torturous way of bringing it into the existing mythos of the Bible. Without really saying where people are like, that's kind of a stretch. Like what would you say if you came across pattern where you say, yeah, I think if we really took on this pattern in a perspectival participatory format, that it goes towards an ideal, just like maybe an archetype, but just doesn't happen to be referenced in the Bible, or at least not easily. How would you incorporate that, or how would you deal with that? Did that make sense?
I think you're saying if let's say are you talking about from a different source like Buddhism or Taoism or something like that?
No, I'm saying like maybe something that's not included in any of those older religions, and that maybe is a creature of modernity.
Okay, I meet some postmodern dude at a bar, and he lays down some truth, and I'm like, oh man, that's so true. How do I incorporate it into my life, my Christianity? I think fairly easily. Is that the question?
Yeah, like would you think, like, if it didn't easily fit into any, into the New Testament or the Old Testament, if it didn't fit into any of the truths that are laid out there, I think
it would be fairly easy to do. And I'm pretty sure if I thought through your question, probably can't think of it on the spot. I can probably think of 15 different things where I've done that unconsciously or organically. That's why I say it's an organic process. Like, there are a lot of things I liked before I became a Christian that I didn't necessarily put down as soon as I became a Christian. And how do they kind of fit? How do I reconcile them with Christianity? I just kind of do it unconsciously, organically.
But then it almost sounds like you're saying something very similar to him. You're almost describing an open mythos, an open creed.
Probably. I'm just saying that, yeah, I have no problem with an open mythos, open creed. I just think that at the bottom of it, see, when he says like, I believe and propositional knowledge is the problem, I'm not necessarily sure it is. There's some propositional knowledge that dogmatically insists that everybody believes it, or they're not part of the church, or they're not part of the faith. But that's not really like necessarily the heart of what's being. Man, this is so hard to explain. Go ahead. It's so hard to explain what I'm trying to say. It's like I have no problem.
Well, no, but it sounds like,
to be clear,
you're more similar than different with Vervaeke on this. That maybe you're a little more closed than he would be on the mythos, but it doesn't sound like you're much more. Now other Christians maybe, right? But I think you're a pretty.
Other Christians start to bristle when they think you are bumping up against sacred cows, or I don't. I was raised secular till I was 29. That's a really big difference. Right. So I was raised like John Vervaeke, and I probably read most of the same books. The stuff he cites, I was reading when I was 21, 22, like whatever, Nietzsche, Plato, whatever. Not really Plato, but you know what I'm saying? So I was raised in a secular way. So when I start hearing stuff like this, most Christians, I've noticed, even Paul Vanderklay starts to get a little uptight, like if this is going to step on a dogma somewhere. I don't think that way. I haven't been trained to think that way. So I never think that way. I never go, he's going to say, he's going to rule out the crucifixion, or getting ready to rule out the resurrection. I never think like that. I wasn't raised Christian. So yeah, I'm totally
likewise.
open-minded.
I would say that my argument here is not that Vervaeke is wrong. I do actually agree with him on most of the points he brought up. My argument is that almost everything he brought up is already a feature of the religious systems that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't parts of the religions that have crystallized in the way that have made, developed unhealthy patterns within them. I also
Right.
agree with that. But
Right.
I think it's a better argument to refocus the faith, right? He could have made this entire section on how like from within the church, and it would have been just as great as
Well, but he's
from
also
outside.
not
it's a really good point though.
But he's not just thinking
Because
of Christianity; he's thinking of all religions. So you have to take into account Islam, Buddhism,
Right.
Hindu, like
Sure.
but the point he's making, I think, is that, this could happen within the context of a religion. It doesn't, because some people are closed off to the idea of it, but religions do update, so it does happen within religion too.
Well,
I think-
and to be very fair to him, it may have been in the interview with oh my god, I'm forgetting, Jordan Hall, where he said he does recognize that even within the religion, sometimes they can't. He's not saying religions can't do this. So I think he did say, I didn't take notes on the.
He just said
Jordan
it's
Hall, but
improbable that they would update themselves in this manner.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I think we've got some fairly liberal Christians here, whereas some.
What are
I
the
think
updates that we're looking for exactly?
Well, I mean, you can go with the obvious ones, like things like homosexuality and, but I mean, even like, the internet, I think is probably there's probably a lot. I mean, even just the conversations that we're having, like I've just been noticing, like the patterns that I've noticed in the us versus them. I think, I mean, one thing. Okay, there are some aspects of religion that are open to other people, but often it's in terms of converting them. In my experience, religions tend to enhance us versus them rather than go away from the us versus them, which I think is a pattern that I've noticed is a problem that I think we can combat against. For example, now
Do
maybe
religions do that, or do people do that?
well, I think well, for example, the chosen
Yes,
people
totally.
certainly does
People
that.
do it.
Yeah, but like I said, the chosen people. I mean, that's a big. That I guess that's a bad taste in my mouth that I have for.
They're just
That's
really good at
true.
telling
Somebody-
stories, man. Come on.
Sorry?
Somebody else mentioned that today. That's really bizarre. Oh, Brian Stevens. Weird. Okay, go ahead.
No, just like to me, like the chosen people that I mean, for one thing, I think it sort of goes. It's a little non-agapic in my in my view, having this one group that are the chosen people, and everyone else, of course, are not chosen, right? So, I was even been thinking of the Abraham and the Cain and Abel story.
Pod, you're a dad, right?
I am a dad, and my kids love to say, "Who's your favorite child?" And I'm very adamant.
What about when they were really young, right? Like, how do they start out? Just me. I'm the chosen one, right?
Oh, they all wanted. If I ask them today, this week, they say, "I'm the best, aren't I?" But
We have to let cultures grow up. We all have to do it. Like America does it too. We're the best.
oh no,
Canada
sure,
is our hat, right?
Yeah,
It's all America.
But that's not necessarily a pattern that I think is great. For example, the pattern of chosen people is not one that I think is not really a great pattern to promote.
Well, right. So, the chosen people should be the servants, let's say. Right? To the point earlier. To renew the meaning.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, keep on going. Go ahead.
I think he hit on something. The chosen, your interpretation of chosen is very modern, not in the sense that you've updated, but it means something different than a modern kind of pejorative about how that would be. It's elitist. He's saying chosen requires something of the chosen, and it's actually like not necessarily a burden, but that's a big part of the story of the Old Testament is they weren't living up to the obligation of being the special tribe, the special called people there was this is hard to say to a modern audience, but because there's been so much propaganda against this, but there was like a standard of excellence and righteousness and character that was required of the chosen.
Okay,
And
I hear that, but also, I mean, if we look at those times, it makes perfect sense in those times that these were tribes, and these were tribes with their beliefs, and so it makes sense that this tribe would think they were the chosen, right? Because it's their God, and that makes entirely perfect sense. And I get that pattern makes perfect sense too back then, when again all the other tribes were out there trying to kill you. But we live in a bit of a different society today, where we're trying to promote cooperation.
Whoa. See, I don't know. What do you mean? Our whole project's all about trying to downplay the us versus them dynamics, right?
Right. So
You don't see politics currently spiraling out of control right now, right?
There's always in Canada.
There's always political. There's always political conflict, but there's still the fact that, for example, in the West, where democratic countries in the West have never been at war with each other, right? That we've learned some patterns that have helped promote peace. There's certain countries in the world that haven't learned those patterns great yet, but we've done a pretty good job of finding some patterns that really help
the
countries live and work together.
Helps us live and work together over here.
I want to know.
What? Yeah, go on.
Which is if we offload all of our war conquest and those types of patterns to places that are removed from our locale, right? It becomes a lot easier to imagine that we have become a more peaceful people while being arguably the most warlike people to have ever lived on the planet.
I'm not saying we've done it perfectly. I'm not trying to take a naive approach to it. So, but we have picked up some patterns.
Canada has the longest confirmed kill for a sniper.
I don't know, I'm not a pacifist in that sense, but I'm saying we have figured out some things, some patterns that go, and I think that there are certain patterns in like the nature of, like you were just talking, Craig, like my creed is the correct one, which by definition almost has to mean the other creeds are not correct, right?
Yeah. The next layer is, what do you do when you encounter a person who does not share the same creed as you?
Right. And truth
again,
seeking.
we get to see lived out patterns of how that went, and how what the actual mechanism is to
I'll give you one. Christ is the only way to salvation. Is a pattern.
Right. Okay, that's a dogma.
Our way.
That's different. That's a dogma. That's totally in the pejorative sense that he means. Whether true or not, that's a dogma. I was talking about something different. In the pursuit of truth, you do assume that there is going to be truth, or you wouldn't bother to pursue it, including Vervaeke. That means there is exclusion of falsehood, not exclusion of this guy believes, not exclusion based on false categories, but exclusion of falsehoods. There are ways to read the Bible where there are propositional truths that are pretty much beyond dispute. And I'm not talking about, that one. That's pretty just that obviously you have to be a Christian to accept that as true. I'm talking about being a merciful human being is better than being a cruel person.
No, right. But remember, I'm talking about, the question was, what are some of these patterns that should be maybe updated? That's one that I think leads in the wrong direction. That this is the only way. It is a way, maybe a good way to put it, but the only way, if we're talking about, that's a little more.
Wait. Are you saying there's another way to get to the Father?
Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna have to mute for 1 second.
Sure.
Okay.
Says the dad.
What happened? Says the father. Yeah, irony.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I've got to quiet down. I'm keeping my kids awake. I get too excited during these. Sorry, what were you saying, Tyler?
Are you saying there's another way to get to the Father?
Well, remember, I'm not a believer, but I'm talking about.
Well, then why do
you
you
know,
care if Christ is the only way to get to him?
because I think the
Do you want to get
pattern
to the Father?
no the pattern that is promoted by that splits people apart. I think splits tribes apart. Where, like you said, my goal is to bring tribes together.
Getting to the Father is an anti-rivalrous good, though.
Sorry, getting to the Father is an anti-rivalrous good.
Yeah. There's nothing within that that would make me say I have to fight or attack Brett because I'm going to the Father through Christ.
Well, no. Well, I mean, there is. I brought not peace but the sword, but there's other passages that that can lead to that. But the whole point again of chosen people, I am the only way. Those I think are saying my tribe, the pattern, the bigger pattern. If we put aside the specifics of it, the pattern is my
That's the
tribe
pattern
is-
of our life, though. Like when I came into this world, I was just me. Couldn't stop. Sometimes I still can't. It's hard, man. It's hard to give that up. And if
Sure.
you were to write down the story of my life on a record, the first part of it would look pretty messy. And honestly, this part would look pretty messy too. But nevertheless, I have to have some guiding principles and recurrent ones. And there are some that seem so powerfully recurrent that make sense of these perennial problems. And I would say that the existence of an egoistic culture that feels it is the chosen one is not very different fractally than me feeling I am the chosen one growing up and the world is all for me.
So, and I'll try and even here take a different tact, which is even with a statement like, right, this seemingly incredibly dogmatic statement, right? No one can come to the Father but through me. And we are called upon to believe it. Another way to go about that is to ask exactly what is Christ. And does claiming it to be true, does that get you any closer to the Father? Right? Does that have anything at all to do with this path towards the Father?
No, but you have to believe that people who don't believe what you do are in some way wrong or bad. Like it leads to that naturally.
It doesn't.
Are you sure?
It doesn't, because it does how you've heard it and how it gets presented. But if you weren't raised Christian and they don't put the message.
I love
that
you, Pod.
What?
I love you too,
Pod.
I love you too, Tyler.
I'm a Christian.
Yes, I'm not
No,
saying
but
it does for everybody, but it does for that pattern of the tribalistic. They are wrong. They are damned. They are damned if they don't believe what I believe. That I have to save them. I have to impose my will on them.
Yeah.
to
So we
save
use the
them.
word fundamentalist for that, right? Usually.
Sure, but it's a pattern that's baked in. That's baked into
Well,
that.
hold on. Now look at every religion.
I disagree with.
Look at every religion, and you'll see there's a zealot, right? There's a spectrum.
Sure.
Even within totally non.
Even
so I
within
think
the
what
SJW
I think
movement.
one way to say this is that what we are looking at is not a pattern baked into religion. We're looking at a pattern baked into human beings. And then the complaint is that the religion has not done enough to curb an inherent pattern in human beings.
Yeah, like I would agree. I would say that, for example, that pattern of I am the way, or we are the chosen people seems tailor-made to trigger the tribalistic evolved biases that we have, that we are good, they are bad. And not only that, they are godless, that God doesn't like them either.
Sure. Yeah. And I would agree that this is a troublesome quality of human beings. But I do think that at least within the religion I've come to find myself seemingly part of, there are many corrections from there, right? Christ himself is actually presenting a correction from the Judaic we are the chosen people, right? So suddenly now the chosen people gets expanded outside of literally a tribal identification. And
the ironic thing
into,
is, and then the Jews suddenly aren't the chosen people anymore, or a lot of people have that point of view post Christianity.
certainly. They got knocked off the throne. And yes, and again, right, I kind of brought this up at a different point in my notes, where he was talking about Christianity, or the West's tendency to prosecute heretics. And he was, highlighting how terrible of a practice this was. And then he alluded to the fact that, World War II should be placed at the feet of Christianity because of this long history of how it dealt with heretics, which is perhaps what you're you and him were, perhaps he put it in a very specific term, but you're angling in on this a similar quality that you've ascribed to religion. Would that be accurate?
And more, and I wasn't even thinking of like the terrors. It just the basic pattern of, if we are right, if we are the children of God, if God favors us, then he must not favor those other people, and they are therefore bad.
So right, one way that Christianity tries to keep that from being so forefront is it tells you, you will always fail, right? You are never worthy of heaven. That's what the whole "you cannot come to the Father but through Christ" is supposed to represent, right? If I am not living inside of you, then you're not going to get to the place you're trying to get.
Right? I have issues with that one too, but that's that we may be getting too deep into it for this podcast.
Yeah, I figured he was gonna. The difference is that Christianity was tribal, and Judaism certainly Judaism was tribal. But in its tribalism, it offered, even in the text, that each person is made in the image of God, and then Jesus fulfills that in that which you've done unto the least of my children, you've also done unto me. In other words, everybody is part of us. That's, I think, the first place where there's a corrective to the tribalism built into the religion. Yeah, there's some strengthening of the tribalism, but when Paul tells you to win people, he says, I become like everybody so that I might win some. So you're supposed to actually do the opposite of what a fundamentalist does, browbeat and like get in their face. You're supposed to like try to.
It does the sand off your shoes as you leave if they don't accept your word, right? And
there are things put into it that are there specifically to try and curb this tendency within people.
Well, sure. Like my goal here is not to shit on Christianity, but we were talking about some of the patterns in there that maybe should be updated. Yeah, so I was sort of raising them as it would be good if we could excise some of these patterns, in my opinion,
right. At least. And what I was trying to point out,
I agree.
I agree too. And like a normal preacher sidesteps easily, organically, it's like, the things that he recognizes are going to trip out people rather than be healing and restorative and bring everybody together. He automatically picks and chooses what he's going to talk about from the text, which is a form of doing exactly what you're saying. It just happens. It happens in real time.
What moral system are you referring to in order to determine which ones to take out?
Well, I mean, I mean, in this one, it's sort of just I've seen. I haven't even thought about it framing it in terms of my moral system. I'm framing it in terms of, I guess, patterns that I've seen that I think have produced negative results. Now, maybe I could probably fit it into a moral system.
Yeah, I mean,
I haven't thought about it in that way.
How do you know that dusting your feet off is not a really good strategy?
No, I was saying the dusting the feet off is what is part of that one. That was, I dust my feet off when somebody's belligerent on the internet to me. I'm politely disengaged. That's not one of the patterns I was saying. It was more that was what I was. Yeah, sorry, just seeing a note. Yeah. John suggested we get back to Vervaeke a little bit, but maybe we should have separate stream on. We could go in forever on. We could go in really deep on this Christianity part, but it does sound like there's some consensus here that like at least in this panel that we should have an open approach, at least a somewhat open approach to creeds, even within religion. Is that a fair summary of the positions here? Like you're
I
sort of more
think, I mean, yeah, I think I don't know what open entails. It's a bit open of a word, but I think
'Cause-
that the formulation of not granting this supreme weight to the propositional form of a creed, I think that is a very important quality of a healthy religion.
Thumbs up.
Great. All right. So okay. Yeah, and that's probably yeah. We should probably move through the lecture a little bit. So he moves on to talk about. I mean, he talked a little bit about signal detection theory, and really he's just talking about the balance between setting your in any kind of information processing, any kind of pattern recognition. There's signal and then there's noise, and what we're trying to do is pick out the signal, the information I want, and differentiate it from the noise, which is just the information I don't want, that's distracting, misleading, and that you can't set it's a contextual analysis. You can't, there are certain times where having, where allowing more noise in to make sure you get all of the signal is desirable. And there are other times where having very little noise, but maybe missing some of the signal is more desirable. So, you've got the gazelle who hears a noise in the bush, and, it could be the wind rustling or it could be a leopard. And, the gazelle always runs away when he hears that noise. It's going to run away a lot of the time when there's no leopard, but that gazelle is probably going to survive, where the gazelle who doesn't think it's say, it's probably just the wind, is going to get eaten by the leopard. So really he's saying signal and noise is a matter of relevance realization. Again, relevance realization is an open-ended process that is contextually dependent, that you can't just say this is always the right amount of relevance realization. This is where we should set our signal to noise. And I think that's how he sees the approach to creed is it's a trade-off between contingencies, and we should be, and I think that's what you guys have been talking about too, that you should be open with how you set that line.
How does one determine?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, how does one determine reciprocal narrowing, like when to stop on that for relevance realization, if you can't say that there's enough relevance realization?
Can you clarify?
So it seems that we can define a hard boundary on like a convergent series, but not on a divergent one, right? Because he talks about addiction being a reciprocal narrowing of relevance realization. So clearly that represents some element of relevance realization, which has a hard stop.
Well, isn't it more the participatory aspect like that we do is when we see bad things happen, like, for example, addiction, we see our lives falling apart when you're addicted. You could, without even formalizing it in some, with math or some, rigorous syllogism, you can see your life going to crap. We recognize these patterns. The gazelle who gets eaten realizes really quickly that he missed attribute of the line. It's participation. It's that we find things that work and things that don't work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. But it seems, that's
the point. You can't decide in advance. You have to look at each situation on its own.
It's also incredibly complicated in terms of how all these things overlap, right? So just because the cheetah jumps out doesn't mean you're dead, man. You can run for your life. And you can be particularly adroit. Or maybe you're a clumsy fellow. Who knows? There's a whole series of systems that are interlocking. It's very complex. However, we still manage to pull it off. It's strange.
Well, the way Vervaeke puts it is what you need is flexibility in setting your criteria that are deeply situational. So, and he calls it the perspectival knowing, the situational awareness. So so what I think he would say is the more you practice psychotechnologies designed to increase your perspectival situational awareness insight, the better you will be at assessing these situations. I think that's
So
what
how much do you think the gazelle is updating its models throughout its life?
I don't know.
Or changing religions, gazelle religions, if I may metaphor.
Yeah, I do think we have to be careful at, like, I'm in favor of evolution over revolution. I think that, if we change everything radically all the time, we run into trouble. So there's a reason why we have cognitive bias. There's a reason why we have confirmation bias. There's a reason why we're slow to change our moods. There's that if we changed our mind all the time, it would be chaos. So we do have to be careful, I think, when we change radically, and I think we do something. I have to say, a slow turn of experimentation is maybe better than just saying let's tear the system down.
Cheetah, hold up.
Yeah,
I want to experiment real quick.
Yeah,
just wait. Cheetah, you tell the cheetah to just wait.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if the cheetah understand. Yeah, go ahead.
I got to perform an experiment, cheetah. Slow down. Postmodernism. Don't jump out of the bushes in me, man. Come on, I'm performing an experiment.
Well, humans have capacity to experiment more than cheetahs may.
Yeah, that's true, and that's ultimately the answer, right? So the gazelle isn't changing its religion, but we do, because contextually we lack the explanatory power, or someone else comes along and convinces us that we should.
The gazelle, in some ways, is in that the gazelles that get eaten by the leopard are going to get weeded out, and the gazelles that have a more optimal relationship between when they run in the bush are going to get.
And the ones that don't run away and then do a badass jump over the leopard get all the ladies.
That's right. And no, you're right, because some of the gazelles don't have those skills and just have to run away all the time, where others can take more risks and jump over. And I think he talked about risks, that there's always a risk, that there's always a risk when we set these lines, and that's baked in.
What were you going to say earlier, Nick? Yeah.
I was gonna throw in also that I don't know. I don't know if this is what he was alluding to, but if you look at any religion, it's not one narrative. It's made up of, generally thousands of stories all interwoven together. And I think a lot of that has to do with basically trying to both show a person how to respond to certain types of situations, and is also teaching them literally how to have a dynamic frame with which to assess a problem that they're encountering. So I think, again, I would label this as it's a feature of the religions that currently exist. So I'm not sure exactly how he meant this, as if like religious people walk around dealing with all problems exactly the same. Like that doesn't, I don't know.
And I think, again, he was pretty clear that he's not saying that. Like he went out of his way. He's always so careful, and then he stepped a little bit in it on Christianity in the interview, or in the discussion with Jordan Hall, where he started going a little bit more than he usually says, where he's saying, where he started saying, and we know dogma can lead to terrible things, or words to that effect. And then Jordan Hall said, hey, just so you know, guys, he respects religion.
If you apologize a lot, you can be an asshole.
But this is what he says. If we can, he says we have to set the criteria, but not in an absolutist way. That not to say that there's a final way, an absolute place to set the criteria, that this is perilous. So that's what he means by open-endedness, that if we can acknowledge this, we can acknowledge that we will set the criteria with our mythos, but not try to set it in an absolute manner. And I think, Craig, that's what you were sort of saying. I
yes,
think
it was
very, very similar to that. Yeah, that but and so you would agree with that, and frankly, I think maybe if all people, like for example, Islam, I think a lot of people in Islam would agree with that a lot less.
Most likely. I'm sure you could find plenty of Christians that would
Right.
likewise. I think you could find plenty of human beings
Right, but
regardless
the
of
irony,
persuasion.
the irony of it, and that's why I refer back to the fact that I was raised secular, is I think the reason why I agree with that so easily is that dogmas of the secular world were planted in me when I was 10, 11. You got to be open-minded. You got to check things out. You really got to give things, there are dogmas in the secular world that lead you to those type of conclusions that you think are internal organic conclusions, but they were planted in you just like a religion is planted in you. And he was raised similar to me. So we
were talking about this the other day, Craig, like that there's plenty of atheists who just sort of toe the party line without really thinking it through, and that they don't take that participatory approach to their
and
beliefs.
they use the same type of propositional knowledge, dogmatic, like here's this sentence that I don't examine, that they'll start repeating to you because Matt Dillahunty said it, and it becomes, there's a lot of standard issue talking points, some of which are really false and they haven't been thoroughly examined, but they become dogma too. I mean, it's sort of natural. It's kind of what people do,
Right, and it's natural, which is why we have to fight against it. We have to control for it, and that's I think what Vervaeke
that's what we're
trying
doing
to
right
do.
now. We're fighting tonight.
Exactly.
I think we all agree with that. I think perhaps again the difference is one of strategy. Right. It again, to my mind, and perhaps this is just because I had the experience that I did, that I didn't know how to. Right. There was nothing in the secular frame that could possibly, not even Vervaeke as he currently stands, could have helped me contextualize what I was experiencing. But right, when I lean into a strategy, my idea is, why is this not being argued from within religion? And that's what I think would be
I think he gave the answer. I mean, I think it was in the lecture. Didn't he put the emphasis on the nuns, and I think a lot of this is geared at the nuns or the people who are a little more liberal in the because you guys can take what he's saying, and I think Craig's done this really well. You guys can take what he's saying and you can bring in this grammar and this language into your religions and help make the religions a little more open too, right? Like this gives a language and a grammar to say to people who are more dogmatic, hey, maybe we can do this, we can open it up without that we're not offending our creed. In fact, we're celebrating it because
usually the problem is when people start to do it, or the problem historically, like there was such a thing as liberal theology, which tried to incorporate truth, scientific truth, into the Bible, and they went too far. They threw out the baby with the bathwater. So they engendered a backlash, which is modern fundamentalism. It was more of born against the liberal theologians of like the early 1900s than anything else. Then it turned into its own thing. But totally. It's just that people who do it also, start screwing up in different ways. Like they try to be open-minded and cool, and they wind up selling out to various interest groups or like this and that.
It's easy to fall into myopia when you start, doing so. Particularly in a way where, again, there's not that crazy simultaneous motion of like realizing the fundamental truths as they are being experienced through you. And instead, where perhaps we jump on the bandwagon of a momentary cultural phenomena and then think it's something that's forever, and then we start running into myopic problems.
Well, I think this leads well into the next phase of the lecture, where he talks about the next thing that the religion that's not a religion has to do is have an ecology of psychotechnologies. So I think his answer would be that practicing these psychotechnologies would help with that. You would be more resistant to those those faddish those fads that come along if you're practicing these psychotechnologies. So he talks about an ecology that's designed to be top down. So it reaches from the propositional, as what you were talking about, Nick, reaches from the propositional down to the participatory, but is also open and allows bottom up emergence from the participatory up through the perspectival, through the procedural, and into the propositional. So again, it's this theme that he's had since lecture 1 of scaling up and scaling down, and that these psychotechnologies, this ecology of psychotechnology should be helping us do that, I guess, forming the optimal grip on all of this with the four P's.
Yeah, I have no criticisms to make of the practices he offers. Like, I mean, I think they're great practices. Like, please, if you can get more people doing.
Oh, is it me, or I'm losing? Am I the only one losing Nick?
He went robot.
Okay. So, well, but he, in this section, he brings in something really interesting, where he really talks about how he sees this meta psychotechnology he calls forming, this ecology forming, and he compares it to Wikipedia. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but now we can go into a little more detail. Where Wikipedia is this open source engine where people come from all walks of life and they contribute, and in a collective cooperative fashion evolve this encyclopedia. And this is sort of how he sees. He really seems to want this to be an open-ended, a non-hierarchical. It seems it's sort of weird because he's talked about hierarchy a lot, in that the community has to have sort of instructors who can lead, but here he seems to be getting a little bit away from that by saying that it should evolve almost from the bottom up. And I was just thinking, well, Eric Weinstein, and there's some people in this call, Tyler in particular. Eric Weinstein has started a Discord where he's involving people from the community and helping his project with his portal project. I listened in a bit. I'm actually a little bit confused on what he's doing, but maybe Tyler can just give a little summary of it. But it seems to be a project that's very in line with how Vervaeke described building this religion that's not a religion. Did you want to chat a little bit about what Eric Weinstein's doing?
Yeah, I'd say he's definitely employing a lot of these principles to galvanize a bit of a movement around a notion related to giving something to do to a lot of people who have, let's say, time and talent to offer to the world that were probably excluded from opportunities to do so because of things like he called the distributed information suppression complex, and some of these other kind of embedded institutional problems that prevent people from engaging. And so he's created this idea called the portal. And his experiment with the Discord server seems to be centered around the notion of it's a kind of triadic problem of unraveling the meaning of what he's calling in shorthand the graph, the wall, and the tome. And there are deep statements about the physical nature of this universe, and how we can understand it through these mathematical models and formulas. And his I think his goal is to galvanize the people around this idea and give them a sense of brotherhood, so to speak, and togetherness. Yeah, so you're right about that.
Yeah, so it's just really interesting. And first of all, I never heard of Wikipedia. I mean, people often degrade Wikipedia, but he had he had a much more laudatory approach to it. Now, I guess it makes sense that, like, he sees it really, that if we do it that way, it's more of this evolving, not less dogmatic process. I must admit, it's hard to see. It's hard, at least, to envision how something coherent and structured emerges really from that. I mean, the fact of Wikipedia, it's vast. It's not very structured. You have mini pockets of people, it's of who are, working on their own wikis, and people, I've never been a Wikipedia editor, but I know some, and, they have their own favorite wikis that they spend their time on, and some will devote lots of hours and argue in the notes.
Yeah.
And
You end up with subject matter expert silos, right?
Right.
And then you've got a small number of people that do this kind of hop, skip, and a jump across a lot of broad domains, high level editors. But I think the same thing we're going to be seeing crop up in like these Discord servers in general. Like this is the next experiment, let's call it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a worthwhile approach. I think it does need some quote unquote experts. Like you're going to need people who I don't think necessarily it's easy to just come up with these psychotechnologies. That seems to be, I mean, obviously we can draw upon, things like Buddhism and, structures like Buddhism, which has a lot of them already in place. And I suspect a lot of it will be sort of evolving those structures, because Buddhism has just spent so much time and focus on creating these psychotechnologies. But he has hinted that we should be creating new psychotechnologies, based on, say, neuroscience and cognitive science. And that seems to be not something that you can just do, or that seemed difficult for the average person to just do.
Certainly seems to help when you attract the proper crowd. For example, right, a bunch of disenfranchised mathematicians watch Eric Weinstein.
Mm-hmm.
So then when he puts out a call, through his Twitter or whatever, like, hey, go meet at this place. And now you do have, you get a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of people like me that joined in just to go, oh, what the hell's going on here? But you also do get the handful of people that legitimately know what they're talking about and can, move forward certain projects.
Yeah. I listened in a few times and I could not understand what those people were saying. So I knew I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, right.
Listen, the aim is to make it digestible for as many people as is possible. So the end product, at least one of them, will be hopefully a very small, succinct education stack that you can run through to get a grasp of the underlying principles of how the universe functions, which is what my real interest in this is. I want to see that come to fruition. Sorry,
Craig, you were
No, I was just going to say that's one of the potential ways that the internet has already revolutionized a lot of things along those lines. Because what I noticed this with diplomacy, and it's a weird analogy, but it actually makes sense. There's this board game called Diplomacy that I only played once in real life because it's so hard to find people who have ever actually played it. Somewhere along the line, when I got on Twitter and connected about 5 or 6 years ago, it occurred to me, hey, wait, I bet I can find people to play Diplomacy with. Sure enough, there's I could play to my heart's content. I did it for about a year and then I got bored of it. But
cool.
I had never been able to find people in real life, and it's simple to find them online because it connects it connects pockets of interest and niche interests really easily.
So
I was thinking too, go ahead.
I was going to offer a criticism, but if you want to throw something else in, then do so.
Well, sure. First, I'll go into support, then you can come with the criticism.
Okay.
Like I was thinking, like from what I understand of how, tomes like the Bible, at least the Old Testament, especially, and a lot of the other myths of different cultures, that these are stories that were collectively generated over years and years and years. I mean, first orally, and then they became written down. But they were sort of collective tales through communities that came together to notice these patterns. And I'm sure there was way more stories than made it into the final cut. But probably the best of the stories, the most profound of the stories, made it in. We have, because of the technology of the internet, we can do a lot more of that collective working things out I guess probably a much shorter time span maybe than they could have
much shorter time span. And YouTube, like look at this community right here. I mean,
Yeah.
John Vervaeke puts out videos last year, I think, and all of a sudden there's all these little hives of John Vervaeke activist, kind of. I mean, realistically, there's all these little hives of activity around his. That's happening in real time.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson puts out YouTube videos a year and a half ago, and he's got 1.5 million views, and he's almost a household name. Those are revolutions in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, they're totally changing people's perspectives of very quickly, and information is getting down to the ground floor really fast and being, shared around.
Yeah, I think it supports Vervaeke's intuition that we could sort of wikify, we could wikify these, identifying these new psychotechnologies and patterns, and even
get them out there. Yeah, totally. Get them out there quickly.
Sorry, so Nick, what now? Tear it down.
So,
yeah.
So I think that these types of communities do work well, specifically when oriented around tasks. So the idea of developing psychotechnologies through some type of distributed network like this, that's probably a wonderful idea that would have great results. The part where my mind kind of hiccups is specifically on forming the mythos aspect and the narrative form. And I don't, so the examples that I've seen where something like a narrative form has arisen from these communities, it ends up sliding far more towards worship of a personality than it does a kind of dispersed. I mean, we can argue, of course, most religions are worships of personality, but I think it will default into something resembling a classical religion a lot more than he thinks it will if it goes through that kind of approach. I don't think that there's a solid way to form narrative.
Like he's very clearly trying to structure this from a foundational point of view to avoid that. The question of whether he's done enough with if people followed what he's saying, he would avoid that. But I'm not sure. But I think you're right that people tend to lead to these leaders. But let me ask you, like, the New Testament has parables, right? These small little snippets, these small little stories that aren't even presented as historical. I think they're presented as like analogies, as tales to illustrate a point. I mean, we could develop new parables for the modern age, based on just the things.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been doing it the whole time.
Yeah, Pod, what do you think I do all these conversations with you, man?
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying. Like, we can create new myths, and in this sort of, we're talking about, if this, with the Wikipediaing of it, you would think if you had lots of people working together on these myths, on these new stories, you would think, the more profound ones again would rise to the top.
Look, let me ask you. You've participated in a couple of Discord servers now. You've been on Twitter. You've seen some of these self-organizing collective intelligences come together. How do they fare?
I don't know. I like for example, I'm just looking at like our group and how it's sort of growing slowly and expanding out slowly. Just our little group, and now it's very tiny, obviously, but we're finding people with at least like-minded in terms of having open conversations across diverse points of view, which before I thought there were relatively few, but I'm finding more and more people who are interested in having these conversations. So I think it is, I think there's a lot of closed-mindedness out there, but I think there is something to it that people were almost peer pressured into not participating in these productive conversations. I think, the internet is just all about trashing each other and flaming each other and trolling. But I think we're finding more and more people, even the Weinstein thing. Like, I just saw all these people who just wanted to just hop in. No one's getting paid. They just wanted to get involved in these projects. So I think there is, listen, and it's probably a factor of the meaning crisis. I mean, people are searching for meaning, and I think what we're doing is a meaning generating mechanism. And and what Weinstein's doing seems to be. I don't know too much about it yet. So I think there is something to that. How about you?
I think there's a whole. I mean, I'm participating in them, right? I think
Yeah.
they're fascinating. I think they're fascinating, and doing my best to lend my positive expressions into them to see what can come of them. And I'm looking forward to creativity and novelty in the face of the dangers of life and the pressures of modern society and how it's destroying so many people's wills to live and come together. And I think that's what all the people are really ultimately trying to do, is a mixture of regaining that lost sense of community and also looking for a way to something like unleash the value they feel like they have within.
Yeah, it's the agent arena relationship. They want to see themselves as being agents and being part of an arena where they're valued and where they have something to contribute, and that's what generates meaning. I think that's what we're seeing, and it comes back to like dharma, or responsibility, is so the Buddhists or the Hindus would call it dharma. Jordan Peterson talks about responsibility being at the heart of meaning making, and I think that's again part of the agent arena relationship. I am a responsible person. I play a role in my community, in my family, in my culture, and I have a part in it. And I think I think responsibility, dharma, fits right in. And I'm sure there's a Christian version too of that. And so we can see this all in with the second. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I just sort of pointing out that I think.
How do you measure the depth of someone's love? Is that out of left field?
I mean, in terms of the conversation, I don't know. How do you measure the depth of love?
Yep.
The intensity of the feeling. I mean, it depends what kind of love you're talking about. Like the love I have for my children, that there's like, that's the bottomless pit type love, right?
Does it feel like a pit?
No, I maybe bottomless would be a better.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
A bottomless warm pool.
That's right. A bottomless lake, a bottomless hot spring. Yeah.
So if you try to hold in your mind the notion that you must love your neighbor, and also hold in your mind the impetus for that being some incredibly impossible to imagine self-sacrifice by a God that condescended in a way that was meant to kind of revitalize the notion of redemption in the mind of people so that they can alter the trajectories of their broken past. How much do you think is in that, behind that, versus somebody who, I don't know, meditated that morning and had a sip of coffee and...
Well, I mean, the Buddhists have loving kindness, which is a similar type of. I mean, I think, and I can generate the golden rule through purely secular ways. I think, I agree with you. I think that, I think those are positive patterns. I don't think Christianity has.
Well, I'm asking if you think there's a difference in terms of like what emotions they summon, and whether or not there's a difference in depth. I phrased them in that way, in a particular way, by the way.
I'd have to think about it, but I don't know. I suspect my gut tells me probably not, because I think we have different stories we tell ourselves to note this pattern. And I suspect that we have fairly similar practical ways of seeing it, even if we tell ourselves different tales.
So it's almost
to
like
get there.
The feelings and things on the inside that happen to us, we could almost use any set of symbols or ideas to kind of evoke that stuff and marshal it and rein it in and make sense of it.
I don't know about any, but I think that there are some stories that are probably more viable than others, right?
What would those look like?
Well, I don't know. I couldn't. I probably. I don't know. I'd have to come up. There probably are some that are just terrible at it, or that are only tangentially there. But I think the reason these different cultures, including secular cultures, have their versions of the golden rule is because it works. It's a good principle because it's highly effective for generating a good society, and so different cultures have figured that out.
It feels right too, doesn't it?
Sure, because it also feels right because it works, right? When we do it, good things happen. So it's a pattern.
I could go there if you want.
Yeah, listen, my secular more version of religion is that it's recognizing patterns and it's formalizing them in ways that are useful and to help communicate and propagate them, right? So it's trying to recognize good patterns and getting there. But I think, like Vervaeke says, I think there are different mythos that can get to the similar patterns. And that's not to say every religious pattern I think is a good pattern, like we talked about. I don't think everyone in Christianity is good. I think a lot of them are good. Or I was even thinking of the covenant today lately in the flood. And I don't know if this is what the scholars talk about, but the God's promise not to destroy
the rainbow,
or no, God's promise not to destroy the world again is
with water.
It is indicative of the evolution over revolution, that when there are problems in society, we don't just tear the whole thing down. We work to fix it, maybe even from within. And that when you tear it down, you're just starting from scratch. That's not really the way to go, that we should work at it. And I don't know if that's
when you build up from something that has like a nothing foundation.
Have a nothing foundation.
Yeah, no thing.
Thing. Well, that I think that's not the best way to go about it. That we should not be just tearing it down and then impose. Now, usually in revolution, you impose a new structure immediately. You don't just start from nothing. You start from something.
I want to ask you a question though. Here, I just came to my mind, and I don't know if this may be a cheap shot. Right? Do you think that if John Vervaeke sat down with Dylan Roof, he would have more or less chance than, say, like a Christian, to alter his mind or trajectory?
Just for a reference sake, Dylan Roof is the incel shooter, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'll be honest, I haven't paid too much attention to all these shooters and their backgrounds and read their manifestos.
Well, just generify them.
But yeah. I think to generify the, I don't know about that. Let me put it this way. I think different people are drawn to different types of stories. Somebody like me is more attracted to Vervaeke's way. But I don't believe everybody is attracted to Vervaeke's way. And I think that's part of Vervaeke's point, that there are different people find different mythos indispensable. And that's okay. That's again my problem with the chosen people, that where they're saying my way is the way, my way is the only way. I think we should have a culture where we're okay with other people having patterns that are different from ours, because there are different ways, that it's not, Christ is not the only way.
Is that? I thought we decided that was not the religion. That's the people. People do that.
No.
Also, that's impossible up to a certain point.
What is, sorry?
Right? Because, well, like, right, it works so long as we basically have the same sense of morality, right? So we can argue about propositions or disagree about propositions, but it's right. It's one thing to say we can all belong to different mythos. It's another to say we can all belong to different moral systems, because then things stop working.
No, I agree with objective morality too, and that's a whole different conversation. Let's not go down that road, because we'll be going forever. So no, but that's not. I agree, but that's sort of part of my point. Like,
so are you an essentialist then, when Vervaeke is not?
I never, sorry, and I always have to remind myself what the essentialist means, that morality, like, for
Basically,
example,
there's
would
some
have
fundamental essence underneath
no.
these mythologies that is constant and something to be realized, not something that we are in some sense imprinting for the sake of our own understanding.
I don't know if this is essentialism, but again, I think there are patterns that humans have been experimenting with civilization for a long time. And I think we identify certain patterns that sort of benefit a society and certain patterns that don't benefit a society.
Don't you mean that rocks stood up over a few billion years and started experimenting?
Well, whatever that I don't know. I mean, whether it came from rocks or whatever. I believe in evolution, but I mean, animals have their own versions of this too. Other
Okay,
animals have their own
it was
versions.
a soupy sludge.
Yeah. but so what I'm saying is I'm not convinced there's some from on high, this is the way, but I think that we figure out things that work and other things that don't work, and we try to identify these patterns and promote the patterns that work and try to de-promote, if that's a
But
word.
what if he's
Sure.
what if he's deep from within, not up from high?
Sorry, say that again.
What if he's deep and within, not up and high?
Well, within what each of us, sorry, in like,
Mhm.
I mean, if here's the thing, we find ourselves in an environment, and we find ourselves with certain capabilities, and we find ourselves in certain situations, and there are certain patterns that help us survive, thrive, and be happy and have eudaimonia within this environment, and there are other patterns that lead to misery and death and hell, you can call it, right? And so we for example, I mean, I really like the metaphor of hell to deal with hell on earth. I find it more problematic, and I wish, for example, the Christianity focused more on hell on earth rather than hell in the afterlife. I would have found it a more useful pattern if they had focused that you can be in hell while you're on earth.
What do you think
if you
Revelation
follow.
is?
What
Yeah,
do
but
I
Christians
think?
don't usually talk about it in those terms.
I'm
Revelation,
sorry.
Revelation is
I
kind
try
of
to get
hell
him
on
to do
earth.
it, but hey,
Revel-
come on, read it.
Yeah, Revelation. There's actually a cool movie called Come and See. To come and see is something that's said by Jesus a few times in, I think, the book of John, and then I think it's said again in Revelation. But the movie is about Barbarossa, and it's about, like, basically World War II, and it's kind of prophetic, or tying Revelation to World War II, and basically saying hell on earth, what he just said. But most Christians don't talk about it in those terms. They talk about hell as the afterlife, and you're going to burn in hell, not like you're creating hell on earth by doing these things. It's more useful to talk about it that way, I think.
Maybe if we could get back a bit to the Vervaeke lecture. Well, I know we also, or at least some of us, have listened to his recent video with Jordan Greenhall, or was recently put on the channel. And one of the points of discussion within that was actually them kind of taking contempt with Paul Vanderklay's critique of Vervaeke's project of building a religion without a religion, or building a religion that's not a religion. Where Vanderklay's critique is that he suspects that Vervaeke's project will be, I guess, limited or constrained in not being able to have this applicability to, say, the homeless man on the street, as well as the higher intellect scientist. Whereas for something like Christianity, there is sort of this broader scope that it can work for both the lowest and the highest to some extent. Of course, I realize that's kind of Vervaeke's main, or one of Vervaeke's points is that for a lot of people, Christianity or whatever religion they're brought up in is not really succeeding them for this modern times. The thing I was not fully understanding, I guess, with Greenhall and Vervaeke's discussion is it seems like their, I guess, response to Vanderklay's critique is to say that Vanderklay's what scaling ability of Christianity is not necessarily something that they would want. By being able to just have this replicability between people, it is almost it was something like optimization addiction or something like that. Not as crass as that, but that if we're just building a religion that's not a religion that has replicability value to it, that's less of a concern than I guess what they're wanting to get at, in that something that is able to self-modify. I think that was kind of where they were going with that. I probably using it quite a bit, but just wanted to get kind of your guys' thoughts on their discussion and on Paul Vanderklay's kind of criticism of.
Yeah, I you know, that
I
part
haven't seen the
frustrated
latest.
me. Just again, because it seemed like they dodged the criticism in order to highlight a fantastical vision of what a dream religion would do without any connection to reality or people, or even what the religions themselves are already doing. Right. And it seemed like what they were describing was, well, wouldn't it be great if instead of it having applicability across a hierarchy, every random person that joined would actually enhance the system? And that seemed to be the only criticism. That was like their entire response was like, let's describe this form where it doesn't matter who joins. Not only will they understand it, but now them being part of it will make it better. And again, that just seems to dodge the question of like, how do you make something where the highest of the high can play around with the abstractions of it forever, and the random person you know at the pit of their life that you bump into can find extreme value in it. They
And not
didn't
everybody
deal with
wants to
that.
create the religion, right? Not everybody wants to be the leader. Not everybody wants to help build it. They just want to be given the way, so to speak, and
Sure.
tell me what to do.
And
Yeah,
on the
totally.
other end of that, it's also not to say that people are not finding extreme value, right? It's like when you get the homeless person to have a right, you bring them into a religion and watch their life transform, that obviously brings tremendous value to the rest of the people that belong to that religion. Right?
Yeah,
Like it's well
totally.
known, it's well documented. We all talk constantly about the stories of how we were at some pit in our life. And then, right, it revitalizes the faith of those around us by relating our story.
Right.
So that's already, again, it's already a feature. And they like used it as a sidestep to remain inaccessible, which frustrated me. But
I gotta go, guys.
Oh, great.
okay,
Thanks,
Greg.
Greg. That was great. Thanks so much for coming for
Yeah, this
joining
is cool.
tonight.
Yeah. The Chiefs won. So.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, good
Spoiler
Chiefs.
alert.
And I saw I had seen on Twitter some guy had bet his mortgage on them winning, so I guess he's happy tonight.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
He gets to
Not
keep his health.
not exactly the smartest thing to do, but there you go. Sometimes stupid pays off. That's sometimes stupid works. All right, guys.
All right, thanks, Greg. Have a great night. Yeah, like it seems so far. Like I was really hoping he would go a little bit beyond, and I hope he does. Like we're still only at 39, a little bit beyond just this is what it needs to do, and have more of an idea. Like he seemed to indicate he seemed to indicate in that discussion with Jordan Hall that he doesn't really have that firm an idea of how it would actually look in practice.
Yeah.
And like he seems to be wanting to create criteria that is dogma proof, but it has to be human nature proof to do that, and it's easier said than done. I agree.
Yeah. And that, again, like, that's totally fine. Like, if you're in that phase of development and want to share it, those are wonderful ideas to play around with. I guess the part that frustrates me is having it contextualized in the sense of, like, the system that we are critiquing is already failing at this wonderful new idea we just came up with, without even stopping for a moment to think, well, wait, doesn't it, is this, are there examples of this already taking place? And, it's, I guess it's just a give credit where it's due type of thing. But maybe, I don't know. Perhaps I'm asking for too much. I very much enjoyed the talk. It was just one part that was kind of like, oh, come on, give us a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I know he doesn't want to. I know he's just being careful. He doesn't want to be a guru, and I get that. But I think I'm hoping at some point he provides a little more guidance, like at least like a cheat sheet of the psychotechnologies he knows of already that we should just be starting to incorporate right now. Like meditation, we get, but he seems to make it believe it's much broader than medication. Like, what kind of serious play are we talking about? What kind of rituals would this religion that's not a religion have? It's not obvious to me what sacred rituals, and sacred in the way he describes it, we should have. I just would like some idea of what he's talking about there to help think in that direction.
Well, and to be fair, right, making those types of statements are dangerous, and it opens you up to a lot more critique than keeping things vague opens you up to. And maybe that's just like literally not what he wants to do, and he's just going, here's some general areas, now someone else go do the dangerous part. I don't know. Yeah, but it does. I don't know.
Like at one point,
having played around in lots of cults, I've seen just how very wrong, very wonderful ideas with lots of articulation can go once they meet the road of actual human beings taking it seriously. Things can
and how do you see like the wikiing of it? Do you think it would just result in a whole bunch of enclaves, or do you think it could result in something in an open source religion?
You just got you get a lot of really holy wiki editors.
Yeah. well, that's it. I mean, there's battles enough with current wiki. I've not participated, but I've read accounts and talked with people involved in these wiki battles, at least a couple wiki battles, and these guys are, some of them are very into it. Let's just say. To a surprising degree, given that it's just it's a a free website on the internet, but they're very, very concerned with the wording, and they change it back and forth, and they get the mods, and there's like, I don't know if you've ever looked at the notes behind, like when you go into like the comment notes,
pages,
edit notes,
the talk pages. Oh my god, some of the times it's a world of crazy. Like it's just it's I don't know how, first of all, I don't know how any of them follow it, because it's not very user friendly, but they get into it.
So would you
huge
say
degree
that the enormous contribution and accomplishment that Wikipedia represents, all that volunteer labor, has a superficial quality which is aesthetically pleasing and beautiful to behold, yet hides behind it an incredible mess of hard won and hard fought battles?
I mean, that's probably a way of putting it. Like, I think Wikipedia is incredible. I mean, I as a first place to go to get a general idea on something, it's an astounding. You may not want to base deeper work on it, but it's a great place to start for almost any topic. It's amazing that humanity has come together and done this. So sure, and like I said, having peeked between the curtains, there's a lot more drama involved than we think. I'd be curious if Vervaeke has peeked behind the curtain of these talk pages in Wikipedia as he's contemplating wikifying this religion that's not a religion, because it does give you a whole different perspective on the editors, at least on some of these pages. But
Quick, go check the
And
wiki page for Corban.
I'm sure, yeah.
and yeah, again, I think I would just restate what I said earlier. I think that type of idea would work great for certain types of problems and not work well at all for other types of problems.
I still don't see how. Okay, I don't see how, at least it's not obvious to me yet, how a wiki type project or even like a Discord type project could produce a community with at least some hierarchy of wizened leaders who can guide people into, like, who are not, like, wiki seems to be geared towards the autodidact. Like, to wikify it seems to be like the autodidacts just come together and figure things out, rather than what he's talked about, where, you know, the wise experts who are steeped in the traditions can guide, who have already sort of worked out a lot of this, can guide the people. But we're talking about sort of starting from scratch. So, like, you don't start off with a community of experts like that if you're talking about new stuff. I mean, otherwise it's just Buddhism.
Well, and ironically, I think it would work better in the sense of, like, basically cashing in social credit, right? So if Vervaeke became famous, then he might be able to pull all the authors of these books he's citing into something like a wiki. And now he's actually got a little bit of a ground where something, or a Discord or whatever, where he's got a little bit of, like, substance that he can work with, right? Again, using Weinstein as an example, right? He actually attracted at least a handful, you know, a very tiny percentage, you know, maybe 1% of the people that joined are actual legitimate, you know, graduate students in mathematics or whatever. But they did show up, right? So, but the other problem is that it's a lot easier to know who's good at mathematics from who's good at, right, wisdom or you know, spiritual practice. So that's a complex
and again, just
problem.
the idea of creating new psychotechnologies, I mean, seems astounding. Like, how, like, these are things that evolved over probably centuries, right? You know, meditation practices and whatnot. I'm trying, like, can you just take somebody who's an expert in, say, neuroscience to just come up with a new psychotechnology? Is that a practical way of doing it? I don't know. I mean, like, could I just sit and think of a new psychotechnology? Well, actually, in a way I have. I mean, a lot of my method is a psychotechnology of how to have better conversations. It's the development of a psychotechnology. So I guess to some extent we can, but I'm not developing, like, meditation. You know?
Yeah. Well, and even you run into the problem of, like, you've been practicing this psychotechnology, but exactly how easy is it to transmit to another outside of sitting there having conversations with them and practicing the skill set itself, right? It'd be really hard to codify what you've learned as a list of rules that a person could read and then follow.
Well, you know what?
Conversation.
The interesting thing is, like, I'm running into exactly that problem. Like, I have these started YouTube videos where these scripts where I'm trying to codify it out, and then I'm like, oh, I got to think about this more, and I've got to think about that more, and think about this more, and in the end, I'm recording nothing. But maybe I was thinking maybe I should just give myself a little bit of a break and just start talking.
Let it free flow for a bit. Yeah. You know, I did have one point too. This is slightly sideways, but I did want to bring it up I forget exactly what reminded me of it, but it's interesting to me that when people talk about secular systems of moral, I don't think I've ever heard our legal system get brought up as an example of how such a thing, like an open-ended secular system of morality. somehow I've never heard the legal system get brought up as a example of that.
And it succeeds quite well too. I mean, we have order in our society because of it.
Right? And I mean, it's a pretty perfect example because it works quite well, and then it has very glaringly obvious flaws that we're, all familiar with, and it's like this weird, I don't know, it seems like people would want to bring it up either as an example to attack or an example to defend, and it just kind of dodges the conversation.
Yeah, maybe people just don't think about it too much, and it's interesting. Like if you've read, why am I forgetting? Is it Deuteronomy or like the Old Testament has a very detailed legal system, which if you read it, you can see it is very strongly the antecedent of our common law and civil law systems in civil code systems, in a deeply religious sense as well. It's interesting, but yeah, we can talk about secular forms of objective morality in a once we get, I feel like once we get through the 50 episodes, suddenly we'll open up so many other topics that we keep on back burnering.
We struggle enough to stay on topic, I suppose. But.
Yeah. Objective morality is a good topic. I like talking about it, and it's tricky, but it's a good.
Have you thought of replacing the title with transjective morality yet?
Oh, I'm still working on figuring out what exactly transjective means. I sort of get it, in this circling out and out and out, and as soon as you get to the next level, it leads to the next level and leads to the next level. But I find some of these concepts, like when I see the box that he draws with the arrow pointing out, I sort of get it, but I'm trying to get a sense of transcend what like the word transcendent is such a, sometimes I feel I get what transcendent means and other times I don't. It's these strange words.
Yeah. Well, and transjective, I guess, would be right, as opposed to objective, which supposes there is some essential morality. It would focus more on morality as what arises between the proper relationship of a agent to their arena, and thus is fluid or dynamic.
Well, my objective morality is somewhat dynamic too, in the sense that it's very context dependent and even relies a bit on or at least draws on trial and error, and figuring things out and being open to new ways. But again, that's a whole deep topic. John
whole different.
John and I have talked about.
We'll play with that one another time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been going for a while. Are there any other points that anyone wants to bring up, or do we want to start?
One thing, I don't want to go too far into it, just because I know last conversation we went into it quite a bit, but I recognized again how he reiterated how he was looking for a religion, or that's not a religion that has gone post-narrative, but he still brought up how like a religion requires, or it's not really a religion, but religio, I guess, requires some sort of mythos, like its indispensability to human beings is a mythos. And so I see, I guess, that he's drawing some sort of distinction between a mythos and a narrative, but I'm not exactly sure what that distinction would be.
No, I don't think he is. I think that a mythos is a narrative, but I think he clarified it. I don't know. Were you on at the beginning? We talked a bit about this at the beginning. You may. I'm not sure if you were on, but I think
I was here just listening.
Okay. Yeah, but what he seemed to clarify was he doesn't want the mythos to be geared in an absolute manner, that it should be open-ended. So it should be like relevance realization. It should be subject to change and ebbing and flowing and zooming in, zooming out. So and you were talking about the trans words. It should be analogous to the transgressive mythology of the Gnostics. So let me just find he wants it. Okay. That it's plausible that there is a mythos that is indispensable given the contextual sensitivity and the dynamic coupling of the religio set of symbols and stories and celebration. and shows associated with the mythos. But the problem is not to confuse indispensability with metaphysical necessity. So he doesn't want to get rid of mythos. He wants to get rid of closed mythos. He wants to have a mythos that is open to being rearranged, similar to relevance realization and religio. That's dynamic, and that's not based in the absolute.
Again, I when I kind of run through the calculus in my head, while it sounds wonderful, right? It would be great if we could all just kind of have stories that inspire us, and we just, form our own story of how everything makes sense. I again get the sense that the way religions have done it, of like having, here's the core couple things you have to believe about this story, right? The credo, and then within that allowing
are we live? It says an error occurred. Please try again later. I don't know.
Oh, really? We should be. Let me see. Yeah, we're still live.
No, maybe it's just mine. All right, never mind. I'll refresh. Sorry. Go on. Oh yeah, we're still good. It was me. keep on going. Sorry.
No worries. Basically allowing the maximal amount of dynamic movement within a mythos while still having something to anchor it to. I don't see how you get out of that.
I think
entering into pure
religio,
chaos.
anchor it to religio, though. Could it? That's how he says it. Now I don't know exactly what he means by that, but he does seem to have some idea that it should be geared. That it should be geared at. Let me try to find it in my notes, but it should be geared at religion. Does anyone remember?
Towards the practices,
that acknowledge the centrality of religio. So I think that's where he's. So yes, I think it's maybe his way of recognizing his recognizing that this issue that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And he may not have. Again, he seems to be. He sees the problem with the absolute, and so he wants something more open. But I don't know. I guess we'll find out in the other lectures, like whether he's figured out a way for that to work in practice. I don't know yet. It may be easier said than done, and it may be like, if we're talking about setting the line, it may be that one reason religions have used the absolute is because that's an effective method, and there's downsides to it. But it may be that it's hard to do it. It's really hard to do it without that. But it's a worthwhile experiment, I think. I mean, that's a lot of what he's talking about, is trying something new. And again, a lot of his audience is the nuns and the religious people who have sort of gotten away from the psychotechnologies, even of religion, that have traditionally effectively helped promote meaning making and agent arena relationships. So, so I think there's still something.
And as I wrote in a comment on Paul's channel, it's like I totally think that Vervaeke's project will help, a number of individuals along. Like I don't argue that point at all. I guess question whether it can scale, and if it is in any way, really any different than what we already have going on. Superficially, maybe, but at a more kind of basic level, I wonder. But again, that's not a judgment; it's just a wonder.
I have the question, the similar questions. I mean, and some of it may be. I mean, a lot of, like, I recognize certain patterns, like for example, Peterson. A lot of the things I don't like about him, like are geared, like he's terrified of communism and authoritarianism, and I get that. But I think it leads him to this extreme individualism that I think can also be problematic. And I get the sense too of Vervaeke has focused on some of the downsides of religion traditionally, and he focuses on that. He's just looking for a solution that gets all the pluses of religion without the downsides. And that's where sometimes where it can be problematic.
Yeah, you
and
lose
it's not easy.
lose a little bit of the variables at play in the effort to banish the bad thing.
Yeah, it's not easy, and sometimes, I mean, sometimes we have to live with some bad. I mean, for just without getting into politics, like I believe, you know, capitalism is a pretty effective system mostly, but I also believe that we should have a welfare state to catch the people who fall through the cracks. And I recognize that, yes, that's probably we're probably gonna lose some productivity with that, but that's a cost I'm willing to pay to support the people who really need that help. And so there are costs sometimes, you know, there are costs, but we have the problem. Like I'm a nun, and like here's the thing, you know, maybe at one, like I can see, like I'm not an anti-theist. I see a lot of benefit in religion, and I like, you know, I was thinking a lot more about the Vervaeke's helped me with this, thinking more about the usefulness of you know, the good things in religion, and you know, the and Peterson has helped me too with the psychological aspects of the Bible that I think is useful. But I'd be pretty surprised if I suddenly get a belief in God. And people like me do need, you know, would be beneficial for us to have a structure, something that helps us promote that without that structure of God. And I think that is very useful. And like you said, I think for the more liberal people who do believe in God, Vervaeke has a lot to sort of bring back a lot of, you know, to even help the religious people. And that's where I think he's a good bridge. What he's presenting is a bridge between theist and at least the more liberal of the between non-theists and the more liberal of the theists, who like I mean, frankly, if all theists were like the people who are in this call, the new atheists would never have appeared, right? Like new atheism is a reaction to the fundamentalists and, you know, the people trying to impose their will. I mean, that's what it's, you know, if you guys were the ones who have been in control for all these years, you know,
well,
Dawkins would never. Dawkins would be Dawkins would be you know, a biologist doing his stuff. Sam Harris would probably be teaching meditation somewhere, and you know, they wouldn't have become
well. And it is, you know, I think it's a useful time to bring stuff back into the religions, because people are realizing, even, you know, within them, that hey, something's not working. Right, we've crystallized this a little too far in a certain direction, and as part of that, you automatically see auto corrections pop up from inside of it. They're just not the loudest voices or the most right. Much like Vervaeke himself, you know, he's not nearly as loud as Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, which bodes ill for the project, but that's where maybe you know, we can and it's funny, he's so careful in this, like he doesn't want to become that, but he desperately wants this word to get out. He wants to help. Like, I believe me, he said in this lecture, I want to help. It sounds crazy, but I just want to help, and I think he does. But it is
unfortunately helping is a lot more dangerous than it sounds.
it can be. And
so to the point of scalability earlier, you know, if we live in a world that values sovereignty, then you're going to let people self-select into, and this brings in Craig's point earlier, these disparate groups that can now find themselves across the internet. And so you won't have scalability anymore. I think it's just people going to be coalescing into the groups that resonate the most with them, right? Or that feel like they can enter into without altering themselves too radically, too violently.
But is that a problem?
My world of cults, right?
Well, look, the nuns are what, like 20%, and if you add in the more liberal, the religious, you know what?
You don't find that at all ironic? You're called a nun. You want to move to a convent?
Yeah, NONE, but yeah,
I know.
But you know, no, but I mean, let's just say he only reaches the nuns and the liberal theists. That's still, you're looking 30 to 40% of the population. That's still a pretty good number of people.
And I think it may even just be kind of, it's a liminal phase. Okay, so this lasts for 5-10 years. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and even if like what he does, like I find it hard to. I think listening to his and Peterson as well. I think listening to both Peterson, like I'm not much for Peterson on his politics, but his psychological approach to religion is really makes it hard to be an anti-theist, and so does listening to Vervaeke. It makes it hard to be an anti-theist. Just accomplishing that would help with relations between theists and anti-theists. And I think helping theists see that atheists, non-theists, can be just as spiritual and have meaning-filled lives as anyone else is a huge thing. If that message alone, if all he accomplishes is both sides see the other as less evil, that's an enormous boon. He's more than paid for, all of it. Even if it never, even if the religion that's not a religion never accomplishes, if some of this seeps in, that's amazing. He's done a service.
Well, of course some of it's seeped in, right? Haven't you personally derived some value from this?
No, tremendous value. And I'm saying even if that's the only thing that perpetuates through the society, he will. That's a massive success.
Reminds me of the Buddhist. If you only bring one person ever so slightly closer, it will have been worth it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if one person would be worth it, but if I mean, I think what he's doing is part of what I'm doing. Like, there's a lot of people who are rejecting this sort of us versus them that has been spewing
I was just
up.
highlighting the fact that a movement does not have to multiply to millions in order to have to be a worthwhile and meaningful.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Pursuit.
Well, that's what, and really, I think the way to proceed with this is to just start off small, influence the people you come in contact with, and if the ideas spread, they spread. If you start off trying to create a massive movement that influences millions, it's probably almost doomed to failure. But if you just have these little communities at work, I mean, the ones that produce things that really have some benefits may propagate. And
I don't know, man. All I got to do is hit the right hashtag on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
I can move millions.
Wait a minute.
Millions?
Well, move millions in a positive way in resolving the meaning crisis.
Hashtag Greta.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Why did he do 50 hours of lectures? I mean, just come up with a couple of hashtags.
Dopamine's a hell of a drug.
Yeah. Hashtag the Gnostics did some good things. Yeah.
All right. You guys want to wrap up?
Yep. I think we're about there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say that was a great discussion. I think we covered a lot of good ground, and I think our project it's really something amazing that we're doing. I mean, we're not reaching millions right now, but we're reaching us, and I think this is a really great project that we're doing.
I certainly have a lot of fun partaking. That's mostly what matters to me.
Yeah, I don't know how great this is, Pod, but I really very much appreciate your time and your willingness to converse with me. And the same is true for you other gentlemen.
Yep, same.
All right. So, and thank you. I know John had some technical issues today, so wasn't able to participate as much as usual. But thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for Craig, and thanks for Phil and Concept Hut in the audience, and anyone else who is watching. So we really appreciate you guys stopping by and participating in the chat. And if you come across this video later, leave a comment. Try to come back and see if people leave comments. And we want to keep this discussion going. We've got some links in the in the show notes to the Discord, the Bevry Discord, as well as my Google Doc where, at least for most of the episodes up to date that I've gone through, there's notes, so you guys can, if you want to sort of go through it. For anyone who hasn't gone through this series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, there's links to
Pleasure
each of the
Doubt's
episodes.
notes are amazing, by the way.
Thank you. They're good. If I don't do them, I don't remember any of it. But I'm glad I could.
If you don't do them, I
them.
also don't remember anything. So.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, lots of years of university to practice. Came back, but yeah. So thanks everyone, and John, I guess you could end the stream, and hope everyone.